Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. This is Alternatives to Closure, Cooperatives. My name is Clara Shook, and I'm the event coordinator with the West Business Development Center. This workshop is brought to you by the West Business Development Center. We are a nonprofit funded by the Small Business Administration, the SBA, a federal organization, and we host two centers. We host the Women's Business Center and we host the Small Business Development Centers for Mendocino and Lake County. West is funded through California, federal, and local government grants. In exchange for these grants, we provide free confidential business services. Our goal is to offer our services to small business owners and entrepreneurs during every stage of business development. So whether you're just starting out with an idea or a part-time hobby, or you've been in business for many years, we want to provide resources that can help you with your business development, no matter what question it might be. There is no question too small or too big for us to help you with. We offer our services through our no-cost advising. We have a slew of advisors who are each experts in their own field of business. So whether you need help with accounting, marketing, HR, taxes, which are coming up, pretty much we run the whole gamut. And we have advisors who can help you one-on-one because no one business is exactly alike. In addition to this, we also offer low-cost workshops and free webinars like the one you're at today, as well as loan packets and loan advising. So if you're getting ready to apply for a small business loan or you have questions about your small business loan, in particular, I'm thinking about folks who have taken out PPP or EIDL loans, we have advisors who can help you answer any questions. And that's pretty much how our funding is used. If you'd like to reach out and find out more about other resources we can help provide you with or what it takes to become a client, please feel free to visit our website and hit the Get Started button, or you can also call us on the phone and we can help get that process started. I do want to let everyone know that we are recording this workshop today. I will be emailing a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slide deck out in the next couple of days, so just keep your eye on your inbox for that. I do also want to mention that there will be a poll at the very end of this workshop. We ask for you to stay to the very end and help us answer those poll questions. These poll questions are really important because not only will they help us find out what you are looking for in your next workshop or business training, these poll questions also really help us maintain our funding. So enough about all that. I'm going to pass things off to our amazing instructor today, Ashley Ortez. Please take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for being here today. So I have been working with business support services for lots of years, and most specifically, around a decade ago, switched into specifically working with worker-owned cooperatives. And I started that through a graduate program in Los Angeles. And my thesis was focused actually on setting up worker-owned cooperative resources in the city of LA, which merged into an organization that's up and operating now called the LA Co-op Lab. And that led me from there into the Arizmendi Association of Cooperatives in the Bay Area, which some of you might know about. We have bakeries and also some construction-related cooperatives, a landscape design build, and a general contracting business that are all work-around part of a large association. And then I also currently do some work for the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center as a technical advising specialist, and work with businesses who are looking at any form of employee ownership for their businesses. And today we're really going to look at worker-owned cooperatives, but I have a lot of information I'm going to try to get through because I'd like to do a short overview of employee ownership and specifically, why we're talking about it today during this current crisis, and then really focus in on worker-owned co-ops. And I have a brief overview, including a little bit of history and just defining, what really is a worker co-op and why is it different from other businesses. And then more specifically today, really drilling down to what are some ways that you could look at actually tapping into the benefits of worker-owned cooperatives in these challenging times. So we will look at some pathways that you could potentially take that might be a little bit faster and or more collaborative, given some of the stressors that so many businesses are facing right now. And I don't mind interruptions at all, questions throughout. Some of this stuff, if it's brand new to you, can be somewhat confusing because it's similar to business in a lot of ways, but there's some aspects that are really different in the way they're defined and the way they manifest. So feel free to jump in and just even turn on your mic if you want with questions. But as Clara said, we'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end. So alternatively, just feel free to put questions in the Q&A and we'll make sure we answer them at some point. So I wanted to start with a really broad overview of what is employee ownership, because there's multiple ways that people can own a company, the people that work there. And one of the main defining pieces of this is simply that means that employees who work there own a financial share in the company. This often means, too, that employees have rights to participate in the governance in some form, and that varies a lot with all the different structures, which we'll talk about a little bit, the different types of ways that can happen. And that ownership is offered broadly, so that typically a majority, if not all, of employees have some sort of ownership stake in that company. And so why employee ownership during this crisis? It really is showing, especially now, and even there's a lot of research now from the 2008 crisis as well, looking at worker co-ops there and employee-owned businesses, that it's a reliable and proven solution to address loss of jobs and income inequality. It can help keep businesses open that might otherwise close. And really, this is all stemming from the fact that workers within these companies make decisions collectively. And that influence is shared across the whole workforce. So as you can imagine, if everyone working in the business is allowed to collectively have some kind of voice or impact on how decisions are made, there can be a lot more ingenuity, a lot more kind of quick action to react to situations like COVID. This picture here is from a report that was done by the U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives, in partnership with a group called the Democracy at Work Institute. And these are resources I put at the end, but there have been some really amazing reports that they've been doing to show how this collective impact can really have a positive effect. And one of the stories I'm remembering right now is there's a large construction cooperative on the East Coast called South Mountain Cooperative. And I recently just heard an interview with them. They're around 40 years old, I believe, been around a long time as an employee-owned business. And after 2008, they had actually realized the impacts that were happening from that recession and that challenge, and spent some time collectively with all of the employees. I think there were around 35 employees. And they were talking about how now, coming into the pandemic this year, they had actually already pre-decided amongst all of them to have a 5-step plan, essentially, that they were going to decide on of how they could start to make changes, like changing their wage structure, maybe first. Secondly, how they're going to maybe lay people off in different realms, all the different ways that wouldn't be easy, of course, but that were there so that they all knew ahead of time what was happening if they hit this kind of crisis again. And sure enough, when this happened, they had a plan that they could react to much more quickly. And they said that it really made an impact. And even though, again, doesn't mean that there are not hard decisions being made in these companies in the same ways, but there's just a lot of difference in the way that it's happening, because everybody who's working there typically has some sort of say in how to make those decisions. So I want to just mention that there are 2 main types of employee ownership. The first of those is called an ESOP, or an employee stock ownership plan. And that is basically like an employee trust that's set up similar to a retirement account. It's typically most valuable for larger companies. So I'm not going to focus on that today, but just wanted to point it out. It is an option depending on the size of business that you have. A path to look at. But today we're going to focus on worker-owned cooperatives, the other main type of employee ownership, because this is a type of ownership where it can work for any type of company, any industry, any size company, really from 3 or so workers up. So now I want to shift into a little bit about what a worker-owned cooperative is, in case you haven't heard of it. And if you have, hopefully this will be a little bit more information to ground you in what the benefits are of looking at a worker-owned cooperative model. And also I'll talk a little bit about just the history, how they came to be a part of our business system. So at its simple level, a worker-owned cooperative is a company that's owned and governed by its employees. The workers own the business and they share in the profit. So at a very simple level, that's what defines it as different from a different type of business. Decision making is democratic and each worker has one vote. So that's a big piece of a worker-owned co-op, is that nobody can own more than one share of the business. And each of those votes is equally as important as anyone else's vote, no matter what role they have in the cooperative. And there can still be different types of management roles or different wage structures, different roles within the operations of the company, but this is at the governance level, the decision-making, kind of the ownership level of the company is defined by that shared vote and an equal vote among workers. So sometimes I think it's helpful to start talking a little bit about what worker co-op isn't, because there are lots of other types of cooperatives as well, which are different than worker co-ops. So you might have heard of consumer cooperatives. Oftentimes grocery stores are consumer cooperatives. Things like REI, you might have heard of, the large recreational equipment retailer, is owned by the people who shop there, but not by the workers who work there. Housing co-ops you might have heard of as well, another type of cooperative ownership. There's a lot at UC Berkeley, amongst other places. Banking co-ops, you might have heard of credit unions. Those are cooperative structures, but again, they have a different defining structure. And then also self-directed nonprofits is a really kind of a growing piece of what is connected to the cooperative sector. And that means that a nonprofit, a 501c3 or otherwise, actually operates collectively as a cooperative, even though their structure isn't specifically a cooperative corporation. And just a quick side note, if it is new to you, there is in the state of California an actual corporate entity that is a worker-owned cooperative. So as I'm talking about this, at the core, the business is and can be a corporation. It just has this level, this definition now that the state recognized several years ago through a new statute that allows it to be operated in a slightly different way for the benefit of the workers. And some examples to help you see the different scope of industries and scale. Alvarado Street Bakery, you might know, in Petaluma, is one of the larger worker-owned co-ops in the country. Arizmendi Bakery, as I mentioned, in the Bay Area. Also Rainbow Grocery in the Bay Area in San Francisco is another one of the largest ones. I think they have 200 and some worker owners who, just like as we just defined, they all own and share in the profits, and they all have an equal vote of how that business is run. The largest in the country is Cooperative Home Care Associates. It's a home health care company in New York City with somewhere around 2,000 worker owners right now. So they are a great example that you can look to if you're interested to see at that kind of scale of how they are operating and allowing that shared ownership voice to manifest effectively and efficiently and competitively amongst their industry. Equal Exchange, you might have heard of as well. They sell products nationally, coffee, teas, chocolates. They're also a neat example to look at on a bigger scale because they have people all over the country and they're still able to maintain this collective process in terms of how the business is run. And then Namaste Solar is a large solar cooperative in Boulder, Colorado. And worker co-ops can be found all over the world. There's actually a lot more worker-owned co-ops in other countries than in the US. Spain is a real center point. There's a whole region there called Mondragon, which is where the name Arizmendi actually came from. If you're familiar with the bakeries in the Bay Area, it was the influence of that region. And it's really a whole region that's filled with worker cooperatives, everything from banking to international appliance production companies, education, everything. Same with Italy. They have whole regions that are operating this way. France and then Central and South America as well are some of the center points. And just a really quick look back. The modern day cooperative that we are talking about today really rose to prominence during the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And one of the first co-ops that was documenting all of these principles and their processes was called the Rochdale Pioneers. And it was actually a group who were doing bulk grocery buying in England in 1844. And they actually set up a set of ideals that became really the basis of all modern cooperatives. Now, it's not mandatory, but it's a set of principles that a lot of the businesses within the cooperative sector turn to find kind of guidance and inspiration and a shared vision amongst the workers. So you can see the 7 cooperative principles here. Things like voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, we already talked about. A big one I wanted to mention is education, training, and information. As you can imagine, a lot of people become owners in these types of businesses who have never owned businesses before. So it's really essential that part of the operations of a co-op includes education. And then also I wanted to point out the cooperation among cooperatives one, which is a really special piece, I feel like, of this sector, is that once you're engaged as a worker cooperative in the business community, I think you'd really find that there's an incredible amount of sharing of information and support. And because of all of the openness amongst these types of businesses, because everybody's participating not only in the financial decisions, but in all the governance level decisions of that company, there's a lot of openness amongst employees that's really different than traditionally owned companies. And so then you can really see how that could be shared more openly between cooperatives as well as within them. A really quick overview, just to give you a sense of the worker cooperative sector right now in the US. There's around 450 co-ops employing about 8,000 people and generating, millions of dollars in annual revenues. So the sector is still relatively small, but they are businesses of all different sizes, from very small, as I mentioned, 3 people, to relatively large, several thousand. And I mentioned already that co-ops can really be in any industry. And here you can see just a quick map, some of the concentrations of worker-owned cooperatives. The Bay Area, of course, is a big center point. Also, Madison, Wisconsin is a big point. There's a lot of research going on there. The university is there. And then New York City has become a really big center. The city government actually there and in Madison, Wisconsin, put actual funding behind the development of these businesses in their budgets several years back. And that's made a really big impact in starting to support the resources that people need to start these businesses. And so a little bit more detail about how they are owned and operated. So I like this diagram just because it really boils down the important pieces of co-op members. And I should point out that the word member is really used interchangeably in the worker co-op world with the word owner. So in this case, when I'm talking about members, that is the owners and also the workers that are part of the business. So the three things that they are gaining from this business is that they have ownership, they have control, and they're benefiting from the work that they do financially. So the employees of the business are its owners and its shareholders. And as we already talked about, membership is open to all based on set criteria. Of course, the company needs to have some kind of hiring process that would make sense for whatever that business is, but the membership is open to the people that work there. And that employee owners buy into the co-op at an equal amount. So this is a key piece of that equality portion of what makes these companies different. And that amount can be set by the founders or board, something that makes sense, again, for that specific company. And that annual profits are distributed to employees equitably. And I'd like to point out here that equitably is different than equal in this case, because it's often based on the hours worked. That's how the distribution is broken down. So it's not as though somebody who might work 10 hours a week gets exactly the same amount of profit distribution as someone who works, say, 40 hours a week, but they get an equitable share based on the number of hours worked, or however the business decides to equitably share those profits. But on a day-to-day basis, they really do function like any other business. So all of this stuff we're really talking about in terms of the decision-making and governance is happening at the ownership and operation level. But on the production side of things and day-to-day, the front-facing aspect of the business really can look like any other business, and you might not even know what that business is. So traditional structures of management can still happen within a worker-owned co-op, if that makes sense for your industry. People can make different wages throughout the day for different roles. All of that's possible as long as there's this shared equal ownership aspect. And what was I was just going to say? One other aspect of that. Just that the management aspect, the challenging part of that is that you really have to wear different hats. So that's, if you think about, say, a company with 10 people who are all owners, who share that governance level decision making, but say they go into the field and have a manager role and different roles as employees. That's the biggest challenge, I think, is that people have to be able to do both things. They have to be able to put one hat on and share decisions equitably, and then they have to be able to, say, take direction from that same person later if they have a different skill level or a different strategy for how the business needs to work and function. And that's really how cooperatives remain competitive with other businesses that are not cooperatives, is that they're functioning day to day, just like any other business. And there's really good systems in place for decision making to keep things happening in an efficient way, where the decision making is happening at that either board level or ownership level. But by the time things are happening day to day, most likely everybody doesn't have a say in every decision that's going on. So I think that's sometimes a myth that people might have about cooperatives, but they have great structures that can be put into place to operate very efficiently and effectively compared to traditional businesses. And I want to just do a very simplistic for today overview of the financial structure of a worker co-op, just because it is one of the unique pieces of what defines this business type. So at the end of the year, the business would have its net profit, and that's going to be split up into what would be a collective or reserve account, similar to another business, where you'd be reinvesting some of that profit into the business to make sure that you have that reserve for the business. But the rest of that profit is going back to the people that work there. And this is typically called patronage dividends, and it's divided equitably, as we talked about, amongst as many people as work there. So now I'm going to switch gears one more time to focus on 3 ways to either start or become a worker-owned co-op. And I think I'll pause really quickly just to make sure there are no questions so far.
No questions so far.
Okay, great. I will keep on going. So there's 3 different ways I'm going to focus on today to start or become a worker-owned co-op. So of course, you could start up a new business from scratch. You could convert an existing business that you already have, or you could combine existing small businesses into one new worker co-op. And I really want to talk today about the kind of the streamlined way to make these things happen, because I know right now there's just so many challenges that hopefully some of these options would be viable for people looking for something different in this time of crisis. And again, going back to the beginning, a lot of the benefit of looking down this path towards cooperatives is just the collective nature, whether it's working together to combine ideas or looking around to the people you might already work with to see who wants to come together to put in more time and energy into a business. You know, the benefits of that can be really profound. So before we talk about the 3 ways, I just wanted to talk about a basic pathway that we often direct people through for any of these pathways to employee ownership. So any of those 3 directions I was just talking about, I'll go through and specifically talk about each of these steps in that pathway, because the pathway is the same, but of course the steps to get there are going to manifest a little bit differently. So the beginning step is an exploration, and then that would be followed by an assessment of the business climate, the resources that you have, the network, anything that you need to start to gather, as with any kind of startup, to move forward. And as you'll probably see right now, a lot of this is really similar to starting up any other kind of business. So oftentimes I think co-ops get put into this other camp as though there's something very different, but there's so much that's just the same as moving forward. And then there's these little points of divergence where the definition of how things operate and work and where the money flows is really what defines the difference. And to that point, the next step in the pathway is the structuring of the business, and then actually executing that, incorporating or converting, whatever path you're going down, and then support, which we'll talk about today, to make sure that you know for any of those paths what resources are out there for support. So this is going to be a very broad overview of starting up a new worker-owned cooperative. And there are tons of resources out there online. As I was mentioning earlier, one of the principles about cooperatives is co-ops helping co-ops. So if this is a path that you're interested in, if you have access to a computer, you can find lots of stuff online about those different resources. So now I'm going to just walk through those same pathways for each of these different types of startup or conversions. So typically for starting a worker-owned cooperative, of course, you'd need the business vision, the idea, just like any kind of business. And typically, we suggest finding a team of 3 founders before you begin. I mean, anything smaller than 3 would be more like a business partnership. But once you have 3 or more people, starting up together is really a great way to do it, rather than starting on your own and bringing people in later. Although that is possible if it's a vision that you have on your own. Sometimes it can just be harder to kind of back up and bring that crew of founders along in an equitable fashion in terms of building that vision. But again, either way is possible. And oftentimes you will find like-minded people who are thinking about the same vision once you start down this path. So the assessment in this case would be some kind of business feasibility, whatever you'd like to do in that route. You might have seen, if you've already started some research, something called the business model canvas. That's a really great tool that, again, there's lots of information that's open and shared online about how to do that, to vision out what the business model might look like and where you're going to make money, essentially. And then some funding possibilities. You'd want to start researching, assessing how that might happen to start up. And then the structure, deciding on an entity type. As I mentioned, in California, there is a specific worker-owned cooperative corporation that you can look to, and that helps define what's in the bylaws, which is really the operating document for a worker-owned cooperative. And that's where you would see a lot of these aspects of shared ownership laid out and defined at the real core of how the company can operate if it's going to be within that type of structure. And then, of course, you would start the new entity at some point, start operations, and then the support piece. As I mentioned, there are lots of co-op experts out there. I have a resource page at the end with a lot of links. But just to mention a few here, there's the U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Co-ops, which is based in the Bay Area. They have a great whole resource library, also a whole network of cooperatives, membership list that you can look to for similar types of businesses and or inspiration. The Democracy at Work Institute is also in the Bay, along with the Sustainable Economies Law Center. All East Bay located, tremendous resources and lots of stuff online. The Sustainable Economies Law Center actually has a whole co-op law library on their website that talks about a lot of the startup details that I'm mentioning here. And then business experts like the West Center, you're here today. Hopefully you can tap into more resources that they have, because as I mentioned, even though you're starting up a cooperative, there's going to be a ton of your startup direction that is no different than any other business. So really looking down both of those pathways, I think, is a recommended and a strategic way to make those moves. And then there's the pathway of converting a business to a co-op. So we've been seeing a lot of people right now in the crisis needing to find ways out of their business right now as soon as possible. And actually selling to the employees, even though it is a tricky process, not tricky, I should say, it's a challenging process. It's not easy by any means, but it actually is a really fabulous way to look at an exit plan for getting out of that business, and or workers can, or owners can stay on too. So if you're converting over, it doesn't mean that the current owners have to leave. There's ways to stay involved, but this can be a really great way to change that over. And oftentimes people, I think, when they think about selling a business, might think to sell to competitors or outside just on a business market, but that can often be pretty challenging. So looking internally to the employees can be a really pretty simple way at that level, at least, that there's a logical buyer there already to begin with. So really starting to explore again, how would this work? What would that look like? Assessing is a big one here because the business already exists in this case. You really want to spend some time thinking about the culture. There's a group that I'll point out at the end as well called the Workers to Owners Collaborative. And they actually have a whole ownership assessment survey that's available for businesses to use if this is something of interest, where you can poll the workers there to really get a sense of what kind of ownership do people feel already, and or what would the challenges be possibly to go this direction. So you want to think about the culture. Getting a business valuation is typically a good idea to start thinking about what that sale would look like. And then if you're the owner, of course, the desire for your future, and or if you're an employee of a business and you want to propose this as a path, thinking about the future that you would envision in terms of becoming a new owner of that business. And then structuring for a conversion, there'd be a transition team that would need to be put into place. Both the selling owners and the employees would need to be part of the same and different teams, as basically as two different entities moving through this process. Both need to be starting to think about what that transition means. The employee ownership type, again, today we're talking about worker-owned co-ops. There are also, I wanted to mention, a lot of what we just kind of call in-between structures. So I mentioned ESOPs and worker co-ops as these big buckets, but there's also things like profit sharing and phantom stock type directions. So that is something probably the West Center could help with. Lots of lawyers probably would have that kind of information. So just to put a little note out there about that, if one of these two doesn't seem like exactly right, there are ways that are not such a full shift that allow you to implement and benefit from a lot of the things that employee ownership can bring. And then financing, of course. When any of these directions is something that needs to be researched and then structured, how that sale in this case would actually happen. And then executing a conversion, the attorneys can help structure that sale. They typically are part of a team to do that kind of work. And then support, I wanted to mention another entity in the Bay Area is Project Equity that specializes in this. They are really just fabulous, working nationwide, specifically helping businesses look at pathways to employee ownership. So they do free consultations. They are there for assistance, as are any of the other co-op support entities, and or I'm guessing, the West Center, some of their business advisors, people would be able to help with this direction. And then this one, I just wanted to mention specifically this idea of starting a small business together with other businesses. I wanted to mention specifically within our current times, the challenges that we might all be facing, because there's a lot of potential to not only look to the people you're working with, but to look within your community possibly, or even your region, to see if there's people with compatible businesses or products that you might be able to collaborate with and start up something new, or adapt one of the businesses that's already there into either a co-op or even just some kind of partnership. So the beginning of that exploration would be just thinking about other compatible businesses or products that there might be out there. One of the examples I was thinking of with this would be in say like a food realm. If somebody was making fresh pita breads and that's their specialty, and someone else they know is making hummus, and say somebody else has a retail shop that is not being fully utilized, you could look at possibly bringing all those businesses together to sell those products out of one retail location. And just try to think about any ways that we can utilize just all the different business resources that we have in all these changing times, the way retail is so different right now, and just everything being so different in the business community during this pandemic. There's lots of potential, I think, to think about things in a new way and look about potentially partnering. So once you found that kind of compatibility, you'd want to start doing the assessment stage. Would be looking at what kind of entity would be best. Would it be a worker-owned cooperative that everyone could come together in? And so you could start a new entity that everyone would be an equal owner in, which I think would also work well if everyone's used to being their own owner of their small business. This would allow for not only the camaraderie and collaboration that is the benefit of employee ownership, but it also allows you to have that ownership feel and not have to give that up working for yourself. And so I put here too, right? How would you create that shared ownership culture? Just really trying to think about that, because that is one of the beauties of shared ownership, I feel like, is I was a part of one of the Arizmendi bakeries for a while as a worker owner there. And I had owned my own businesses a little bit before that. And so I felt the pressure and the stress of what it's like to own that business individually. And one of my favorite things of being a co-owner of the bakery was just that feeling of coming to work and realizing, in our case, we had about 10 other owners, that everybody there cared as much as I did about that business. Sometimes that can be challenging. We used to joke sometimes that some days you feel like you have no bosses and other times you feel like you have about 10 bosses. So it's not all perfect and easy, but the feeling of having that shared love and commitment to a business with other people is really something unique. So structuring this kind of direction, really a lot of the same things for these directions, because you'd either be starting something new or possibly converting, but you'd want to be determining any financing you'd need to make this kind of shift. And then designing new shared ownership staffing, management plans, things like that. Because a lot would be the same again, but a lot would also, of course, be different in terms of how that would look, depending on whether it's a conversion or a brand new cooperative. And then executing, similarly, you're starting up some kind of new entity in this case. And one of the biggest differences here would be that you'd be trying to figure out how to market these new products or services or this new vision that you have to share with the community. And in this case, similarly, support the West Center or any other business or co-op experts can be there to help you. So I wanted to take a little time now before questions at the end here to just show you a bunch of different resources, because I know a lot of this work, this has been a very quick overview of all of these different options. But I want to make sure you have some places to go to. This the first one here is the Think Outside the Box manual. And it's an incredible manual that the Federation put together, the Cooperative Federation, that really walks you step by step through how to create this mostly a worker-owned cooperative enterprise, but it has relevant information for any of these paths we were talking about. The U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Co-ops, I talked about a little bit, great resources, also Democracy at Work Institute and the Sustainable Economies Law Center. I also wanted to mention this one, the checklist for starting a cooperative. That is the Boston Center for Collective Ownership or Community Ownership. They have a really great, pretty detailed checklist if you're going to start going down this path. Also, the Workers to Owner Collaborative, becoming employee owned. I mentioned them they have the ownership survey and assessment survey that's available. And also here I wanted to mention they have an incredible library of case studies of businesses that have either converted or started up co-ops all across the country in all different industries. And you can actually sort them by industry, or you can sort them by location. So you could really drill down and try to see if there's something there that can be inspirational. And going back to the co-op principles one more time, I really encourage you to reach out to these businesses. If there's someone that looks like they're doing something similar, oftentimes people are very willing to share inspiration, support, answer some questions if you reach out. This next one is a great conversion story. If you're interested in the converting a current business, this is a company in Colorado that just converted to worker co-op structure a month ago within the crisis. So their story is very interesting and relevant about how they made that happen right now, despite all these challenges. And then this last one is just a lot more business resources based in Canada, but there's a lot that's relevant. They actually have some great tutorials on the business model canvas that I wanted to point out that I mentioned earlier that can be a really great starting point for any of these directions that you might want to go down. So that is all the information I have right now. So I'd love to open it up for any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. All of that information and knowledge needed about co-ops and the different structures and how it works. I'll let everyone know who's listening. I've seen and was hosting the co-op series that we did a couple of months ago, but I still learn everything brand new with fresh eyes. And so it's wonderful. Thank you so much for putting this together. If there are any questions, now would be a great time to go ahead and put those questions into the Q&A or into the chat box, whatever is easiest. In the meantime, I just want to take a second to reiterate what Ashley just said as far as, reaching out and getting assistance and help with your business, whether it's a cooperative style or sole proprietorship, a partnership, LLC. There are resources for small business owners. Now more than ever, we are invested in helping small businesses succeed. So I highly recommend anyone listening to reach out to the West Business Development Center and take advantage of our free business advising or any more of our workshops and webinars that we'll be hosting here on our website. Most of those we keep our workshop schedule up to date as possible. Thanks so much, Ashley. And if you're not in Mendocino or Lake County, you can reach out anyway. As you can see here, there are resources all across the country and the state for you. We are part of the WBC, Women's Business Center, and SBDC, Small Business Development Center. And we are here to help small business owners. So if you're not in Mendocino or Lake County, call us anyway, and we'll help put you in touch with your local centers so you can get the small business owner assistance that you need or might want. All right.
I'll just add really quick. I feel like more and more, a lot of these entities are starting to become more familiar with cooperatives. So that is still a challenge, though, that we find, I think, across the country, is that a lot of the entities might not specialize in cooperative ownership, but I think that is changing. And more, especially during the last year, we've just, within the sector, have seen a lot more business support entities really saying, hey, a lot of people are calling and asking about cooperatives. So more and more people, lawyers, accountants, people supporting businesses are starting to include cooperative information into the knowledge that they have, and or hopefully they know how to reach out to find that information. So even though the sector is small, it just really seems like it's growing, and more people are looking out to their communities and to each other to tap into that collective energy and the resources that can happen by keeping business local and having the people that own the business live and work in those communities and all the benefits that come from that.
Absolutely. And we're stronger together. So please let us know how we can help you and your business. I want to say thank you, Ashley, so much again for putting all of this together and sharing all of your wonderful, amazing knowledge. I want to thank the attendees for coming and participating today, and I hope to see everyone at one of our next upcoming workshops, which you can, of course, find on our website. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here, everybody. Bye-bye.